In 1954, France is at war with its colony Vietnam. The Vietnamese People's Army represented the communists in Vietnam, known as the Viet Minh. The French decided that they needed to defeat the Vietnamese People's Army in order to gain the upper hand at the international negotiating table. They hoped to provoke a Viet Minh assault by creating a ground-air base deep in enemy territory that threatened communist operations against French forces in northern Laos. The French airdropped 15,000 soldiers of the Operational Group Northwest into the valley of Dien Bien Phu, 200 miles west of Hanoi. The Vietnamese General Giap hoped to gain political benefits from defeating a large French force, so he accepted the challenge the French gave him. On March 13, 1954, the Viet Minh launched a determined assault of 50,000 soldiers on the base at Dien Bien Phu. After 56 days of fighting, the Viet Minh lost 25,000 men. Despite these huge losses, the Viet Minh managed to achieve a major military and political victory for the Communists. These victories would pay off at the Geneva Conference, which began the day after the battle ended. America would soon become involved in the war because of the Truman Doctrine and the belief of stopping communism. The Tet Offensive was launched by the North Vietnamese Army against the combined forces of the Republic of Vietnam and the United States. The Communists hoped to start a popular uprising by overrunning U.S. and South Vietnamese military bases in major urban centers. On January 29, 1968, operations were launched all across South Vietnam, but with particular focus in the city of Hue. They lasted until April 8, 1968. The offensive turned out to be a military failure as the local victories that it managed to achieve were eventually reversed. However, it was a political victory as it created an impression that the war was escalating, which seriously harmed U.S. involvement, which later led to the withdrawal from Vietnam by the United States and the North overrunning the South and the establishment of a communist nation in Vietnam. This is extremely significant to United States history because this is one of the first wars that the United States lost. The Egyptians allied with Syria hoped that by launching an offensive on Israel that they could force Israel to the international negotiating table where they would be forced to cede territories it captured during the Six-Day War of 1967. On October 6, 1973, Egypt attacked across the Suez Canal into Sinai, and Syria fought in the Golan Heights in the north of Israel. The Egyptian and Syrian assault on Israeli territory was aimed to overwhelm their defenses using a two-front strategy. The Israeli Defense Force suffered heavy losses on both fronts, but they managed to rally and reverse all of the gains made by the Arab nations while inflicting a high number of casualties until the United Nations imposed a ceasefire 19 days after the battle had started. This proved that the young nation could defend itself in a completely hostile environment, protecting the victims of the Holocaust. In 1990, Iraq had invaded Kuwait and threatened Saudi Arabia, therefore threatening the world oil supply. On August 7, 1990, the United States started to organize nations that would force Iraq out of Kuwait. On January 17th, the United States-led coalition force started to force Iraqi forces from Kuwait. Both sides equivalent in numbers. However, the coalition had technological superiority, especially in the name of the F-117 stealth fighter that was key in destroying Iraqi air defenses. The coalition force took less than 400 casualties and drove Iraq from Kuwait and inflicted over 150,000 casualties on Saddam Hussein's military. This is the first time that the United States was involved in a major conflict in the Middle East. 12 years after the First Gulf War, the United States-led coalition launched an invasion of Iraq where they were opposed by the Iraqi Republican Guard. This time, the United States-led coalition had the intention of removing Saddam Hussein and his supporter from powers. The invasion was launched in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The coalition wanted to stop any possible support of the terrorist organizations and punish Iraq for not cooperating with the United Nations decision regarding Iraq's weapons of mass destruction programs. The fighting mainly occurred between the Kuwaiti border and the Iraqi capital of Baghdad. The coalition achieved a swift military victory and the removal of Saddam Hussein and his Ba'ath Party from power. This led to a bloody insurgency that lasted through December 2011. The United States-led coalition, having achieved the goals of Iraqi freedom 1 year before, were caught in the middle of a bloody insurgency led by Al-Qaeda. The coalition's goal was to remove the insurgent force in the city. The United States entered the city on November 7, 2004. Insurgents were heavily dug in and consisted of huge numbers, somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000. What resulted was the most intense urban combat the United States had seen since the Battle of Hue in 1968. The coalition eventually defeated the insurgents after 47 days of fighting and handed the city over to Iraqi security forces. The Battle of Fallujah was the bloodiest battle ever fought against insurgents in the United States history, with a total of 720 casualties.